Hello everyone, I'm going to do a little less of a formal video here because I realized I missed a couple of the veteran enemy units, so we're just going to kind of do this properly this time and get them all into one video. So without further ado, normal criteria, let's go through it, and I'm not going to have transitions for the sake of time, so here we go. Gargoyle is going to be in the D tier, or what I would also call easy. The main reason for this is their HP isn't particularly high, sitting at only 14. They do have 50% protection, but they are also unholy/stonework, so depending on which item increases you have, you can destroy them pretty easily. They do have a 50% protection, but honestly, with a 14 HP, it's not too hard to do a 28 damage on some other individuals anyways, and DOT of the Blight variety really melts them, and their move, debuff, and stun resist is also pitiful. Their best ability being a Lash of Tail. Usually when I face a Gargoyle, it's honestly not too much of an option. It's honestly not too much of a problem. Coming in next is the Bone Lancer. The Bone Lancer is an interesting one to me personally. I kind of forgot that they were introduced at a veteran level because to me, they really don't add much. They can be one of those characters that can do a decent amount of damage, but once again, I don't often find myself wincing too hard at Bone Lancers. None of their abilities are particularly devastating either. Spear Thrust can be slightly annoying, and Impale, if it gets a crit or two, can be pretty good as well. However, with 31 HP, 0% protection, it's almost the same amount of HP if you really think about it as a Gargoyle. Now obviously the DOTs will do less theoretically, but same as a Gargoyle, can be decently stun controlled, they can be moved, they can be marked. I mean, there's really not a lot a Bone Lancer really offers, and often you can kind of leave them around. I do like to target them though, just because multiple impales can get annoying, mostly actually in terms of stress damage through critical strikes than they actually do physically. Or if you don't have great AoE heals, it is smart to focus them, because even if they do about 5 to 6 damage per individual across the board, that's still about 12 HP missing from everybody. If you have, like, let's say an Occultist or an Arbalist, it can be pretty annoying chasing down everyone's HP. So certain situations you do want to focus them first, but it's more if you can't heal AoE and depending on the priority of the other units available. Next we get to the Uka Major or Uka Savage, depending on which level you fight it. I'm not going to go incredibly in depth into this because if you saw the video already, I already explained most of this. If you haven't seen the video, please go check out the other video. I go in more in depth about the big, meaty, large guys of veteran levels, and this video is obviously about all the veteran. But I already said it before, you can kind of control this guy. The bleed DOT can be cured or prevented, and Tidal Slam being one of its better abilities, but I definitely would not want to fight an Uka Savage before a Bone Lancer or Gargoyle. Much rather have these two guys before I see an Uka, so the justification of adding into the C tier here. Next up, we actually have the Bone General or Captain, slightly above the Uka for many of the same reasons as I said before. It can do a little more physical damage, and unlucky situations you can actually get multiple stuns off on you, which can ruin your party depending on what you need at the moment. But other than that, the next creature I think is a better version of the Bone General, and we'll kind of talk about why. In the B tier here, we actually start out with the Ghoul, so that little intro I just gave right there was actually incorrect. I wanted to talk a little more about what else we're going to see here before we get to what I think is the better Bone General. But talking about the Ghoul is really annoying. I don't think it's quite an A tier individual, and honestly the reason why I got it right in B tier here is it doesn't do an impeccable amount of damage. Skull Toss can be certainly pretty annoying with its critical chance. It can pop off about 20 crit and you can get about 20-30 stress on you, which is super annoying, don't get me wrong. Honestly, the worst part about a Ghoul though is the ability Howl. It's a 75% chance to Har for 3 damage, which isn't really the bad part. The worst part is minusing the Torch and also the 5% chance for disease on the Worries. The reason why that's so bad is that adds 30% more stress damage throughout the rest of your dungeon, and will also take your hero out for a week if you do not have an ability to remove disease via the dungeon. Overall though, it does have a nice HP at 57%, it's got a 40% protection, so it is fairly beefy. It's also got a decent speed of 7, 90% stun resist, so it does last a little while, which is really annoying because if it gets off multiple howls, you're losing your torch, you're increasing that chance for the worries. And also the individual who gets the worries can start taking that. And also, if you have a Vestal or Plague Doctor, I have found many a times they like to get smacked in the face with that and actually get stunned and add all that stress, which is pretty annoying. So overall, I definitely think they're one of the more annoying enemies, but definitely not one of the best. Next up, we have the Crone. The Crone is a very annoying individual. And the reason why they're mostly annoying is the speed of 10, which is pretty good, but honestly that dodge is super high, sitting at 40 something. So the high dodge and decent speed really requires you to probably lean on a jester to get reliable hits, and they also start out their turns in stealth, which is super annoying. So if you don't have a way to reveal them, and both of the back row individuals are Crones, they're both stealth, even your Plague Doctor friend or other individuals that can pull or hit both back row abilities are now useless. Therefore, abilities like Flare, Tracking Shot, whatever have you that can remove stealth can be useful. I often don't carry it on for the wield because I believe these are really the only individuals. And also one of their more annoying mechanics is Embrace the Dark. And the reason why it's super annoying is it's a pretty good stress damaging ability, plus 10 stress, minus 10 torch. But it's the fact that it does 0 damage. You cannot riposte Embrace the Dark. Their accuracy sit at 102. They can be dodged somewhat well if you decide to go with the dodge strat, but for the most part not too great. And their other ability, Curse of Vulnerability, is very team oriented. Therefore they can mark you for fungal scratchers and whoever else needs them. Actually, this time I swear the next enemy we'll talk about really benefits from these marks. And also your character takes minus 20 dodge and minus 10 accuracy on that debuff. So less chance to hit them and less chance to avoid their other abilities. Fetid Sensor is really only an issue if you probably crit everyone in the front row or pull them forward, as it can only be used in ranks 1 and 2. It doesn't do a lot of damage, doesn't do a lot of blight. The biggest thing about that is the 10% chance to do disease, because it does hit both rows. So you don't really exactly want them to use Fetid Sensor, but if they do end up using it, it's probably their weakest ability. But once again, we don't want people sitting out getting diseases removed. Takes far too long. And right here we have the large Carrion Eater. This thing is pretty devastating at times. Has 72 HP, sits at 15% protection, 90% stun resist, 100% bleed resist, high move resist, decent debuff resist, and 140% blight. It's actually pretty grueling to get through this, to be honest. The resistances are pretty good, and the damage it does is also really well. The only reason why I'm not 100% putting this at the hardest is its only huge damage comes in against marked individuals. But let me say this. Once an individual is marked and it does decide to use Tentacle Devour, trust me, it is just a 60 critical waiting to happen if you do not have any protection. This ability can be an instant death's door machine. However, since the fact it relies on a mark is the only sole reason why I'm not going to put this at an A. You can maybe protect people out of this. You can flare this off. It does still only have a 90% stun resist, so you can stun them. And you can also move people technically back to the 4th row. Tentacle Devour cannot hit there, though typically it's not going to do that. And its other ability is Weaken Prey, which is also pretty good. It decreases your damage output, decreases your accuracy, and also applies the mark, which is why the Crone and the large Carrion Eater are actually very good together. So I would argue the Carrion Eater for me, depending on how I feel on the day, could easily swap between A and B. So that's where I'm going to put this. Next we get to the Corrupted Giant here. The Corrupted Giant is a fun one. Once again, I've talked about this one pretty hard before. And at this point in the video, you have realized that I did not change the order of the other video I put out. Now, what I am going to do, because it was a very tough decision, I'm going to put both of these last characters in the same tier, because I truly do believe that on either day they both deserve to be up here, and I understand the arguments for Giant to be number 1 were in the A category. So we have Unclean Giant, much like the large Carrion Eater, massive damage, but the key difference on this guy is does not rely on a mark. He can just pick up a tree and decide to crush your face in immediately for that 55 crit, rather than having to be supported or built up to it. And also, what we really talked about in the one discussion as well, the shuffling can be pretty devastating, to be honest. So between the massive damage, the massive HP of 140, still has a stun resist of only 90%, but it's a lot of HP to get through, and that is pretty much one of the bigger reasons why it's up there. If it had about 90 HP and 0% protection, this would be a different story, because 90 HP, you can maybe two-shot, well, not two-shot, but get through in about 2 turns. But unless you're not popping a critical off every attack you do, Corrupted Giants will probably take you about 3 turns of focus fire, like I said, depending on your luck, and the amount of DOT you can rack up on it. And finally, we get to the Swine Tar once again. much like the Giant, there's a couple of really annoying abilities. The Pig Spear and the Boar Rush are the ones that are really painful. Those are certainly the abilities you're probably going to fear or slash going to mess you up the most. The 160% and 165% stun and then 160% knockback for 3 on the Boar Rush is very painful. If that critically pops, it's a 33. It's not probably Death's Door creation level worthy, but it definitely messes up your party order. It can bring your third position to second, which can occasionally be a problem, not always. Pig Spear can be decent damage, and Crunching Backhand, a couple of those hits can actually turn into critical strikes, but at 15%. So you can get someone stunned in the front row, get popped for 19, extra stress and all that stuff. Now, what I will talk about here a little more than I did in my other video is the fact they can be exploited rather easily. So to give some consideration and some leeway, I will actually put the Corrupted Giant ahead in the A tier, but they're both A tier to me. I would much rather fight a Bone General and an Uka before these guys, and I would definitely rather fight, I mean, looking at this tier, obviously, this is exactly how I'd want to see it. I would love to see Gargoyles. I think they're pretty easy. Bone Lancers, once again, I would like to see them more than Gargoyles, because Gargoyles are faster than Bone Lancers. Ukas, they got a lot of HP, they do a lot of bleed. You do need provisions and certain healers where their bleed does become annoying, so I'd place them up there. Bone Generals, the stun chances. Ghouls, because I hate diseases and stress. Crone, because stress, high dodge, and high speed, super annoying. Large Carrion Eater, because of Death's Door. Corrupted Giant, because of Death's Door. And Swine Tar, because they can certainly get you to Death's Door as well. So these three right here are certainly your Death's Door hitters. The Bone General can be decent with a Bone Bearer along, but for the most part, I don't go to Death's Door too frequently with a Bone General. These guys in general actually don't get me there, but these three are probably some of the largest culprits of me going to Death's Door in the game, hence why they deserve this nice little trifecta. And like I said, this guy could easily ascend into A tier as well if I wanted to. Some days I'd rather fight a Swine Tar than a Large Carrion based on that just 60 crit, because no matter how you shake it, the Swine Tar can't do that. So some days I could certainly see those three being up here, but I'll keep them right down here for now. This should be, I believe, the more completed list for the veteran-based enemies. If I missed one, please let me know. I checked through online. I thought I got them, but there's always a chance I missed one. Thank you so much.